The year is 1968. On the outskirts of Vallejo, California, the night air hangs heavy and still. A patrol car cruises down the desolate stretch of Lake Herman Road, its tires humming against the asphalt. Streetlights are sparse, casting long, jagged shadows that stretch across the road like reaching fingers. Inside a parked station wagon, a young couple sits in silence, the engine ticking as it cools. Without warning, a pair of headlights cuts through the darkness, pulling up directly behind them. The engine cuts. A man steps out. He does not run. He walks with a measured, rhythmic pace, his footsteps clicking against the pavement. He raises a pistol. 3 shots ring out in rapid succession, shattering the windshield and turning the quiet night into a scene of carnage. The glass sprays outward. By the time the first police siren wails in the distance, the man has already vanished into the thick, dark brush. He leaves behind nothing but spent shell casings. Months bled into one another, and the initial shock hardened into a pervasive, marrow-deep dread. The community lived behind locked doors, listening to the wind and imagining footsteps. Then, the pattern repeated. At Blue Rock Springs, the dark silence broke again. Another couple sat in their car, unaware of the figure emerging from the shadows. The ambush was surgical. The killer did not rush. He moved with a deliberate, heavy-set gait, closing the distance between the trees and the vehicle. When he struck, he did not scream or shout. He spoke in a flat, monotone voice, the words stripped of all adrenaline or haste. He stood over them, watching their struggle with a detached, clinical interest. He lingered long enough to ensure his work was complete, his breathing steady, his hands motionless. When he finally retreated into the night, he left behind a single survivor. The survivor would later describe a man with thick-rimmed glasses, a face that seemed to melt into the darkness. The police arrived to find the scene eerily similar to the first, but the killer had left a new signature, the memory of his calm, mechanical voice. Fear was no longer a sudden event. The investigation board at the station grew crowded. Grainy crime scene photos were pinned to cork, connected by lengths of red string that led nowhere. Detectives paced the floor, their coffee cooling in styrofoam cups, searching for a pattern in the chaos. Then, the mail arrived. A thick, heavy envelope landed on the desk of a San Francisco Chronicle editor. Inside, the paper was covered in jagged, frantic handwriting that seemed to claw at the page. The author claimed credit for the murders, detailing specific wounds and body positions that had never been released to the public. The editors read the lines, their faces turning pale as the reality took hold. This was not a hoax. The killer knew things only the police and the dead could know. At the bottom of the final page, a symbol was drawn with heavy, deliberate ink, a circle bisected by a crosshair. He signed the bottom with a single name, Zodiac. The news hit the city like a shockwave. The city was paralyzed. He was no longer just a ghost in the brush. He was a voice demanding to be heard. Across the state, the panic morphed into a strange, frantic obsession. Students sat in classrooms with the cryptic symbols spread across their desks, tracing lines and counting characters until their eyes burned. The killer had turned the entire region into a giant, unwilling puzzle. For weeks, the code remained impenetrable, a wall of gibberish that mocked the investigators. Then, a breakthrough occurred in a quiet home. A school teacher and his wife sat at their kitchen table, surrounded by stacks of paper and sharpened pencils. They worked through the night, testing shifts and patterns, until the letters finally aligned. The message they uncovered was not a political manifesto or a demand for money. It was a confession of pure, unadulterated malice. The text read, "I like killing people because it is so much fun." The words hung in the air, cold and definitive. The city realized then that their tormentor was not a man driven by logic or grievance. He was a performer, and the murders were his stage. He had been watching them scramble, waiting for them to decode his vanity. The mask of the mystery had slipped, revealing a killer who found joy in the terror he manufactured. The stage shifted to the quiet, sun-drenched shores of Lake Berryessa. A couple sat near the water, the sound of small waves lapping against the shore providing a false sense of security. The afternoon was still, the air heavy with the scent of dry grass and pine. Then, the rhythm of the day broke. A figure emerged from the dense tree line, moving with a steady, unhurried gait. He was not hiding. He walked toward them as if he were an invited guest. His presence was a physical weight that silenced the birds and turned the light cold. As he drew closer, the details of his appearance became impossible to ignore. He moved with a terrifying, polite calm, his pace measured and deliberate. He did not rush, and he did not hesitate. He stopped a few feet away, the confusion on their faces slowly hardening into the realization that they were no longer alone. The man stood there, waiting. The violence ended as abruptly as it had begun, leaving only the sound of the wind moving through the tall grass. The killer did not flee. He did not check his surroundings for witnesses. Instead, he walked toward the parked vehicle. With the measured pace of a man completing a task, he reached into a pocket and pulled out a felt-tip pen. The cap clicked as he removed it, a sharp, mechanical sound that cut through the silence. He approached the car door, his hand steady, and his focus entirely on the metal surface. With slow, deliberate strokes, he began to write. He inscribed the dates of his previous murders, the ink, dark and stark against the paint. He did not rush the lettering. He took his time, ensuring every digit was legible and precise. It was the work of an artist finishing a canvas, a final flourish to ensure his presence would be remembered long after he vanished. The streets of San Francisco were slick with dampness when the shot rang out. A taxi driver slumped against the steering wheel, the engine still idling. Within minutes, sirens converged on the intersection, their lights painting the wet pavement in frantic flashes of red and blue. Officers swarmed the area, searching for any movement in the shadows. A patrol unit turned the corner and spotted a man walking nearby. He was moving at a casual pace, his gait steady, his hands deep in his pockets. The officers slowed their cruiser, eyes locked on the figure. They were seconds away from closing the distance. Then, the radio crackled. A dispatcher's voice cut through the air, broadcasting a description that did not match the man in their sights. The officers hesitated. That split second of confusion was all the space the man needed. He did not break into a run. He did not look back. He simply turned the corner and stepped into the dense, swirling fog that clung to the city streets. The patrol car rolled forward, but the sidewalk was empty. He had walked past the reach of the law, disappearing into the gray haze as if he were never there at all. The fog swallowed his silhouette, leaving the police with nothing but the silence. The chase dissolved into a hollow silence that stretched for years. In the back rooms of police stations, the momentum of the investigation began to grind to a halt. The frantic energy of the early days was replaced by the slow, steady accumulation of paper. Evidence boxes were stacked against walls, their cardboard sides bowing under the weight of thousands of hours of fruitless labor. Inside, the files grew thick with grainy crime scene photos, witness statements that contradicted one another, and the increasingly grotesque letters that arrived in the mail. Investigators spent their nights tracing red string across maps, trying to find a pattern in the chaos. But every lead led to a dead end. They interviewed teachers, veterans, and even their own colleagues, only to find the trail had evaporated into the same fog that had swallowed the killer. The letters themselves became a burden, their jagged handwriting and blood-stained fragments mocking the men. Each new cipher was more complex, more sadistic, and more impenetrable than the last. The public fear that had once gripped the state began to settle into a permanent, dull ache. As the years turned into decades, the boxes gathered dust in dark archives, forgotten by the world, but never by those who had failed to close the case. The killer remained a ghost. Decades have passed, yet the archives remain open. The case is a wound that refuses to heal, a permanent fixture in the history of the state. Experts still gather in quiet rooms, debating whether the man was a criminal mastermind or simply a student of human terror. He did not just kill. He turned an entire region into his audience, forcing the world to watch the slow, agonizing unraveling of logic. Some of his ciphers remain unbroken, their jagged lines and cryptic symbols mocking the modern tools of investigation. Perhaps the lack of a solution was the point all along. The violence was merely the opening act. The true performance was the lingering uncertainty. He left behind a void that no amount of police work could fill. As the camera zooms slowly into the final, unsolved cipher, the screen begins to flicker with static. The image distorts, blurring the lines between the known and the unknown. There is no final arrest, no dramatic confrontation, no resolution to satisfy the public hunger for justice. There is only the silence of the past. The truth remains buried beneath layers of time and unanswered questions. He succeeded in becoming a ghost, a shadow. The case ends not with a bang, but with the steady, rhythmic hum of static, leaving the world to stare into the dark. The Merchant of Fear has finished his work, and the silence is his final, lasting signature.